queens and royal gents and popes and priests and presidents, gurus and shamanic healers, pharmacological dealers, zealots righteous in rebirth and worshippers of Mother Earth, mantra chanting meditators.
Welcome to the 100th Monkey Radio with Tom and Ramon. We are recording this on March 11th, 2014. And wow, Ramon, I'll tell you what, we finally got a break in the weather here in Western Washington. It was absolutely a gorgeous day out there after the clouds burned off this morning. This is one of those days that gets that spring fever thing going in me. The temperature is comfortable and the sun is shining, and I happen to gaze at my stick garden from last year, all the dead plants laying out there, and going itching at wanting to get out there and start ripping it up and get my garden going. And it's getting to be that time of the year. I just love it.
Yeah, it's getting nice. Fortunately for my little garden, I didn't have to. Even the snow didn't kill it off. So, but my user's not doing too good. I don't get enough sun, and that needs like a full day sun. I just get like 2-3 hours back here. Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna read a quote out of a story I'm gonna let Ramon share with you here shortly. But this is a Carl Sagan quote that they threw into this, and once you hear this quote and Ramon explains the story, you'll understand the quote quite well. Carl Sagan: one of the saddest lessons in history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozled has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you've given a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. Carl Sagan.
That's an excellent quote.
It is. And so true. I mean, it's just...
you should post that on the website, that quote.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
So what's this story in, Ramon?
So, it's one of those that when I posted it on Facebook, I used a little bit of ungentleman words because it just... let me just read the story. Florida makes off-the-grid living illegal. Mandates all homes must be connected to an electricity grid. Now, basically, if you have your solar panel, your wind power, or maybe you're one of those that figured out how to tap into the 0 point, you can't use it in Florida.
No. That's not quite true. You can use it, but you still have to be hooked up to their grid.
Yeah, that's true. But it's just, let me just read the story. It's no secret that an opposition to sustainable living exists. Earlier this year, Texas State brought several SWAT teams to a sustainable community and threatened to shut it down. Each one of the community members were initially handcuffed at gunpoint. It was called the Garden of Eden community and was totally self-sustainable. You can read more about that. So that's as much as I'll read into that.
Well, let me explain a little bit more about the story in Florida. I read this article, and this lady there, or maybe it's a guy, Robin Serponis, actually been living off the grid for about a year and a half, and they tried to charge him with what sale? They cited him on let's see. The officials, they took her to court, and they ruled that her off-the-grid home is illegal, and they cited an international property maintenance code. I mean, they're really drawing, looking for those big loopholes, or those tiny loopholes to try to, I don't know, put a stop to this kind of thing, I guess. I mean, was completely self-sustaining. She had solar panels and using rainwater and using a propane camping stove and stuff. But they didn't find her guilty of anything except for not having hooked up to a approved water supply. It's just ridiculous the lengths and breadth that the corporate structure, I guess, whatever you want to call it, has really tightened the noose on us in some places. So pretty ugly.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of a quote I saw. Living without a government is like saying animals can't live without a farmer.
Oh, right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good one. So what else in the news there, Ramon?
Well, here's another one. Striking ancient stone idols, the forgotten Polovtsian statues of Eastern Europe.
Polynesia. Oh,
Not Polynesian.
Polstian.
Yeah,
Polstian?
Pelostian. These enigmatic ancient stone statues, or stone idols, as they are often called by locals, are almost unknown to the outside world. The statue, known as the Polovtsian statues, are found in large numbers spread across Russia, southern Siberia, in eastern Ukraine, Germany, and Central Asia and Mongolia. Wow. This is actually the first time I hear of this. Many Polovtsian statues represent male warriors wearing helmets, armors, and weapons like swords, bows, quivers. Hats and purses can be seen on the female statues. So this is quite amazing. Let me see if they throw out a date there. I don't see a date. It's probably one of those things that no one's bothered to really study. But I'll have a link that you guys can look at and read deeper into that.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of these statues spread all over Russia either until I saw this article myself. I mean, and they look like there's some pretty impressive work. So.
Yeah, it's amazing too because that style, there must have been a civilization where the Greeks got their culture, or at least inspired by, because even here in Japan, there's a time period. It's called the Haniwa time period, and it resembles a lot of the ancient Greek things. The way they wear their outfits and the statues, it's just amazing.
Right.
And also that time period.
These statues kind of resemble the Moai a little bit. I mean, there's a little bit of that. I don't know, the Moai or even the South American statues. The ones you see down in South America. There's a lot of resemblance there.
Yeah, we need to get Robert Schock back on and talk to him about that. Okay, here's another one. I think this one you'll like. Ottawa student says she was airborne during an out-of-body experience. University of Ottawa graduate student has come up with an amazing description of an out-of-body experience she had. According to a case study published in the journal Frontier in Human Neuroscience, the woman not only described what the actual state was like, but researchers studied her brain while she had this extracorporeal experience. Oh, that's a new one. When in such a state, she says she could see herself in the air above her body. She could watch herself move, but was aware that her real body was not moving. So I'll go that far into it, but it's great that somebody is studying this finally. We've been saying these stories for thousands of years, and finally somebody says, "Oh, let me pay attention."
Yeah, well, there are actually quite a few other labs that are looking into this sort of thing. I mean, Pear Labs has looked into it for quite a few years.
And Notre Dame as well, too.
Yeah. But they don't get a lot of press with it, though.
Yeah, And also, a lot of them end up doing this kind of stuff secretly. Like, I've had a few scientists tell me that they really enjoy this kind of stuff, but they would never talk about it publicly.
Right, right. Well, they don't want to threaten their grants,
Yeah.
Um,
Can't take away my meat and potatoes.
All right, guys. Well, we have a great show lined up for you tonight. We have I don't know if we should call her Reverend or Dr. Karen Tate. We'll just leave it at Karen for now. Karen Tate is an independent scholar, speaker, radio host, a published author, a sacred tour leader, and a social justice activist. Karen has worked for 3 decades. Excuse me, let me try this again. Karen's work for 3 decades has been inspired by her interests and passions for travel, comparative religions, ancient cultures, women's herstory, and the resurging interest in the rise of the feminine consciousness. Her work combines feminism, spirituality, and uplifting women, all of which are highlighted by her projects. Her first book, Sacred Places of Goddess, 108 Destinations, has garnered prestigious endorsements, while her second book, Walking an Ancient Path, Rebirthing Goddess on Planet Earth, was a finalist in the National Best Books of 2008 awards. Her newest book, Goddess Calling, Inspirational Messages and Meditations of the Sacred Feminine, Liberation Theology, out in the spring of 2014, is already getting rave reviews from her mentors and peers. Her fourth book, the anthology, Voices of the Sacred Feminine, Conversations to Reshape Our World, out in the fall of 2014, includes the wisdom of noted visionaries and scholars who she has interviewed. Tate's work has been highlighted in the Los Angeles Times, the Seattle Times, and other major newspapers. She's interviewed regularly by the media and has hosted her own internet radio show for the last 9 years. Voices of the Sacred Feminine Radio, considered to be a treasure trove of insight and wisdom for our time. Her work has segued into writing, producing, and consulting on projects which bring the ideals and awareness of the sacred feminine into the mainstream world through television and film. She can be seen in the new documentary, Femme, Women Healing the World, produced by Emmanuel Itler, I believe, of Wonderland Entertainment, and actress Sharon Stone. Her website is www.karentate.com. And Karen, I would like to give you a warm 100th monkey welcome.
Well, hi, guys. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for making time for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love the opportunity to talk about the sacred feminine.
So we've Ramona and I have been we've done quite a few shows here recently on both the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And so this show naturally fit perfectly in with where we've been here recently. And I suppose to start out with, Karen, would like to kind of get a little bit of background on you. A lot of us in our journeys, the thing that got us started on the path was that proverbial 2x4. We had to get smacked upside the head to pull us out of the third dimensional, mundane, sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle into actually doing something that really matters. So we're curious, what was it within you that sparks your journey towards understanding who and what we are?
Well, I'll tell you, nobody is more surprised than myself that I am where I am today, because you see, my life, the first 30 years was in a way like that Carl Sagan quote you talked about. I grew up in the Bible Belt of New Orleans, and you didn't hear about anything like this in the Bible Belt. And the idea, I think you mentioned the word bamboozled. Well, when I left the Bible Belt and moved to California, it wasn't long before I realized how I had been bamboozled, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely.
That makes lots of sense.
And so I think originally for me, discovering that there was a feminine face of God beyond Mary, beyond that archetype or whatever you want to call her, avatar, deity, sacred, because we consider her a feminine face of God as well. Beyond her, I mean, we learned nothing there about anything outside of Catholicism or being, the people that we maybe ran into who were different versions of Christian, Baptist. I mean, you never met anyone who was not like yourself. You were absolutely in a bubble. And I moved to California, and it just totally opened my eyes. And at first, the sacred feminine was meaningful to me personally as a woman, because I realized that there was a feminine face of God. And then I went through the stage of being angry because it had been kept from me for 3 decades, and I still knew people who didn't have a clue about it and would probably never, learn about it. But then, after you sort of empower yourself with it, after it informs who you are or the new person that you become, then you start to realize about the ideals and the values that it could offer society that might right the ship, so to speak. That could, I think of goddess actually as sort of the great equalizer. I know sometimes that phrase is associated with a gun, and I don't mean it that way, but I feel like if more people understood what these values were, they would understand that there can be a new normal, and we do have alternatives and options to the way society is shaped right now, how it is being manipulated, how people are being exploited, the domination, the obsession with militarism,
right.
All of these different things.
Right. So, let's get a couple things out on the table real quick so everybody understands exactly what we're talking about here. Now, when you use the word goddess, or what are you referring to? Are you, the common word when referring to that divine principle on the planet right now is God. Okay, and the 1,000 faces of God or the 1,000 names of God, however that's termed. Are we just rephrasing and using the word goddess in the feminine sense in the same manner, or is this goddess that you speak about, is it an individual also?
Well, there are lots of ways to look at the sacred feminine or goddess or divine feminine. Let me just very briefly give you some options. First of all, I think what you're referring to is patriarchy in a skirt. No, goddess is not, patriarchy in a skirt. Goddess is, when I go out and teach about goddess, I teach about her in different ways. For people who are on their journey and believe that there is a divinity in the heavens, well, they discover that, yes, there was a feminine face of God that has been worshipped for 30,000 years, artifacts in museums, textiles, archaeological sites back this all up. So, yes, there was deity that had a feminine face of God. There is also sacred feminine or goddess archetypes. And if archetypes is a word that you're not familiar with, I think probably the easiest way to think of an archetype is a role model. And then there are goddess ideals, values, the feminine consciousness. So we can talk about it in 3 different ways. And the sacred feminine represents different things than generally the divine masculine does. We live in a patriarchal culture. The Abrahamic religions have conditioned us to believe that, male God, and when we have mythology that talks only about a male God, we end up with a society with male leadership, and that leaves the rest of the planet, females, the species, the earth, in service to man and the male face of God. So the big bamboozle is that, you know what, there was a feminine face of God too, to be right there alongside the masculine, but it was sort of swept beneath the rug. And if we had the feminine face of God and those archetypes and those ideals, the world would be more harmonious, more in balance. There would be more equality and justice. Scholars will tell you, you can probably make a connection between losing, and so why do we care about these old ancient goddesses? Well, scholars will tell you that we can make a direct correlation between losing a feminine face of God and having women suffer income disparity, domestic violence, female genital mutilation, infanticide, all the things that marginalize women and make them in the world doing 80% of the work, but only owning 20% of the assets. So it's spiritual, it's social, it's cultural, it's political.
So, you know, I'm kind of from my mindset in the learning and the experiences that I've had. What I'm kind of seeing out of your work and I suppose this is just kind of splitting hairs, but when you refer to goddess, I kind of interpret within myself as divine feminine, what I see in term as the divine feminine, and that energy is the I guess it's the other side of the coin as far as when you look at the divine masculine. Now, I'm not talking patriarchy here at all. You know, I see.
No, I agree with you.
Both,
I agree with you.
I see both are. Yeah, both are absolutely essential for a balanced life, right?
Yes, but we have not had both is the problem. You know,
right.
You look at, for instance, the yin and yang symbol. Well, let me back up a minute. Okay, if the truth be told and you asked me, the divine source, whatever that is, do I think it's, what do I think it is? I would tell you I think it incorporates the masculine and the feminine. And I don't know the unknowable, but I would say to you, I doubt that there is a patriarchal God, because if he were a wise God, he would not automatically dismiss the other gender on the planet, as male dogma has led us to do.
Right.
So, that being said, whether you want to call it God, whether you want to call it consciousness, whether you want to call it ideals and values, whatever it is, morality, whatever it is we live by, we have sort of been stuck with ideas and ideals that have been coined masculine.
Right.
And the things that have been coined feminine have been marginalized in society, considered unimportant, considered weak. And because they have been marginalized and considered weak, by association, women have become the lesser sex, the marginalized sex. And those values have not been valued in society, And I mean, we can get into that if you want, but...
Well, I'd like to go back into our history a little bit real quick first. Have we had that matriarchal society here on the planet?
Well, I wouldn't say matriarchal. There have been matrilineal societies. There have been matrifocal societies. There have been what we think have been egalitarian societies. I think power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't think women, if they were absolutely in charge, if they wanted to do that, I don't think that would be a utopia. That's not what we're talking about. But we do think there were some societies that were more equal, and that's really what we're going for now. I mean, people. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, what kind of artifacts or evidence do we have out of our history that shows that these more feminine-based societies were actually around on the planet?
Well, we have places like Knossos in Greece, Chateau Hayuk in Anatolia, which was Turkey. We have places that Maria Gimbutas and James Miller talk about, that, there were these, societies that were advanced for their time, that were into the arts, and, they were beyond just the hunter-gatherer, type communities, that, they were not warlike. It appeared from, what they could uncover, that men and women had equal roles in society. You had women's leadership. They can tell from the grave goods and things like that. And they also had in their in the artifacts that were left behind, multitudes of artifacts that were female in nature. And depending on how they found them, if they were found in places where you could tell, like maybe burnt offerings were being made, some scholars have made the connection that, these societies were also, worshiping a feminine face of God. Oftentimes, you would find the female images in many, much greater numbers than images of males or phalluses, or, for instance, and there's the whole, were they ancient Barbie doll ideas, and people who I think are willing to look at this through both sets of eyes, and not without a male bias, will admit that these artifacts were more than just ancient Barbie dolls. They were significant because they were made with the best materials that the people had of the time. They put a lot of time and effort into these things, made by their best artists. They were in such large numbers in places that were considered holy. So it all points to, reverence for the feminine, and, like I said, the grave goods and things that they could figure out. There was, equality among the sexes, more of an egalitarian society.
Right. Ramon, anything on that stuff before we move off?
Yeah, I was gonna say that one thing I've noticed growing up is that there's certain strengths that women have that have never really been talked about. And for example, if anybody's ever been rock climbing, a lot of people will tell you that women always make better rock climbers than men, and which is funny because the sport is dominated by males, but women make better rock climbers. It's not because their upper body is stronger, is because when they climb, they naturally use their skeleton. Instead of, like a man has to prove himself, so he does, he pulls himself by his fingers and tires himself out. Another strength that, if you remember when your mom would be cleaning at home, one of the things that you notice is that she wouldn't move the couch with her upper body. She would move them with her legs. So women tend to be like, stronger at the lower part.
Well, and there's some other physical things too that are kind of interesting. One of them has to do with the eyes, and forgive me, I get the two mixed up, but it's about the rods and the cones in the eyes. And one of them, and like I said, I forget whether it's the rods or the cones, but men have sort of a linear view. They look more straight ahead, where women tend to see a little bit more peripherally. How, and I mean, this is backed up like by a UCLA kind of study. I mean, and so women see peripherally, and we believe that sort of translates into how they are in the world. Men sort of set their sights on something and they kind of go straight forward for it, and not that women are incapable of doing that, but they're going to stop and say, well, how are my decisions or actions going to affect the people around me, my family, my loved ones, my community, so to speak? I think that may account for why so many women have not just walked out of the church, for instance. They continue to stay there, propping up a patriarchal institution that sees them as less than men, because it's not just about them. They're thinking about the big picture a little bit more. I think women, and I mean, we're talking in generalities too. I mean, there are always exceptions. I mean, look at Sarah Palin. Look at Margaret Thatcher. But if the patriarchy is serving women, some of them don't think about this stuff or think this way, or maybe suppress it. But I think women tend to think about it's about the we and the us, not the I and the me, a little bit more. And maybe that comes from also being life giver. And you always hear it said that if women had to be the ones to make the decision about war, maybe they think a little bit harder about it because it's the sons and daughters that they have birthed into the world that are out there, spilling their blood. There's also the magical idea that women can bleed without dying. That was really powerful and influential in ancient times when we didn't understand, what was going on. Right. And there was another physical thing, but it escaped me for the moment. Maybe it will come back to me.
Well, one of the reasons why I was bringing that up because the women were never, a lot of women were never really taught what is the real woman's strength. They would adopt these more male type, as you mentioned, for example, those other women, and for example, become more vicious or very snappy when they talk, and they believe that is strength when that's just the same downfall as any male has.
Well, we haven't had a lot of role models,
Yeah.
We haven't had a lot of role models. So in order to compete out there in the world, they've had to kind of play the game like the boys play the game. And I think that's what we're seeing. But there's more of an awareness now. There's a lot more people talking about different ways of being out there. You look at, Gandhi, for instance. We have, and forgive me if, I don't know what your politics are, but I honestly do believe that when Barack Obama came into office, he was actually trying to lead using more sacred feminine ideals, but that was seen as weakness, because when women sort of lead like water, they don't lead necessarily with might. And because it's not always necessary, you can be influential. Indira Gandhi, for instance, it was told how she would gather men in her kitchen and she would cook them things that she made and get them talking and finding solutions to things, over in I forget whether it's Denmark or Sweden, one of those Scandinavian countries, they have what's called a 40% solution now. And that came about, because the government wanted it after, they educated women. They wanted women to have opportunities, and they wanted to put their money to work as well and take it, make sure it was money well spent. So they passed a law called I think it was called the 40% solution. And that meant that there had to be 40% of women in the boardroom. And at first, the old boys club balked and said, they didn't want that kind of regulation. But, it was a law. They had to do it. And 5 years into it, they were reaping the rewards of it because they were seeing that women come up with different ideas. Women do things differently. So it was sort of a fresh perspective. I've heard the sacred feminine described, and versus the masculine described like this. And, this is just one version of difference, but the masculine works with the knowledge he has right now. and that's all he has to work with. The feminine goes out and brings back to the masculine, inspiration and intuition. So with that, coupled with the knowledge that's been learned, then we can move forward. We can have progress. Have you ever seen those pictures of Kali standing on Shiva, the Hindu goddess Kali? Well, you'll see these images of Kali standing on Shiva, and he's immobile, and she's standing on him with her foot on his chest. And what some people will tell you that is a symbol of is, yes, he has the power to be able to do, but he doesn't go out and do until he is activated by Kali. So it's like we really do need one another. We really do need the masculine and the feminine concepts, values, not just in ourselves personally, but how we are in the world, because otherwise things are out of balance and lopsided. And when things are out of balance, it's chaos. I mean, the ancient Egyptians, that was one of their biggest fears, chaos. And they would always strive for balance too, because they knew if there was imbalance, there would be disharmony, and that would lead to chaos and all sorts of trouble. And I think that's where we're at, because we haven't valued the nurturing, the caring, the sharing, the intuition, the inspiration, the things that women or the things that have been labeled feminine, those have not been things that have been important. It's been about domination. It's been about control. It's been about exploitation to get what we want. All of those, things that, it's sort of like the 1% versus the 99%. You were talking about corporations earlier. And, look how corporations more and more are, running our governments, controlling our lives. The sacred feminine ideals are a counter to that.
Yeah, I would agree, because there's a lot of things I've noticed. For example, I'll start off with the female and then move on into the male, where women who throughout history have been bold enough to stand up against oppression or for rights have done it with this. It's very different from the male aspect of it, because the male aspect is, like you said, go straight and fight the battle, where the woman kind of stands back and says, no, you're not going beyond this line, and that's it. And it's not an aggressive, it's more, I don't know how to describe it, but from what that looks like in a male is like, if you look at Mahatma Gandhi, you mentioned Martin Luther King, where they also had that feminine quality where they stood there and said, no, you're not going to do that, and weren't aggressive about it.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, you can even see it in political parties. Look at the Republicans, for instance. They have never met a war they didn't like, and so it's always this, let's dominate, where, the sacred feminine is about collaboration, negotiation, win-win situations instead of winners and losers. And so imagine if that were the way we all were brought up, it wouldn't be this survival of the fittest Ayn Rand mentality, that the poor out there are just lazy takers and, we should let them live under a bridge because if they suffer enough, well, maybe they'll go get a job, kind of a thing. It wouldn't be this idea that multinational corporations or the country with the most bullets and bombs call all the shots, no matter who it hurts. There's so much domination and exploitation going on in the world, whether we're talking about women who only are making 70 cents on the dollar, or people in countries that don't count, that don't have clean water to drink. You know, there's so many things, you know, so many injustices in the world. But if we had as our MO, or what did they call it in Star Trek? You know, it was like your
Prime directive.
The prime directive. If the prime directive was, you know, caring, sharing, uplifting society, development as opposed to growth, you know, real altruism, you know, if we didn't measure ourselves by how much was in our bank book, but what we do to contribute to society, wow, what a different world that would make, rather than this greed is good mentality, you know. And, you know, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, even if, goddamn, you might not even have any bootstraps,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I think people who are privileged, you know, don't have a clue about this. You know, they've maybe inherited their money. You know, they've never struggled a day in their life. You know, they have no concept of what average people go through. I mean, CEOs now are making 350 to 400 times more than their workers, and maybe 20 years ago it was only 50 times more than their workers. You know, I mean, I could, you know, there's only 20% female leadership in, I'm talking about in the United States, there's only 20% or less female leadership in academia, corporations, religious institutions. You know, so the what women bring to the table, what they innately bring to the table, is not being represented. And the men who have these characteristics, well, they sort of have to squash it, you know, because this is all hurt men too. You know, men can't be their authentic selves if maybe their authentic self is not to dominate and control and exploit. You know, what if they tend to be somebody who's more altruistic, or someone who's more into the arts, and you know, they don't want to bully people, and you know, it's not about domination for them. Well, you know, they're looked at as effeminate. You know, like there's something wrong with them. They're not a man, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's like I said, there's so many layers to this onion, you know, and it's, and I think society has been deprived of so much, you know, men and women alike, because we have only valued the masculine attributes, you know, the masculine God, that masculine archetypes.
Right.
Yeah. The one thing I notice is, as far as like the males, is that children bring out a very strong feminine quality, especially like if the father has a little girl. I've noticed it brings a very strong feminine quality out in the male.
Well, you know, I've interviewed, you know, lots of different people on my radio show, and you know, they tell, you know, I've asked them, what can we do different? What can we do different with our children? And I've heard a number of times, you know, boys shouldn't be taken away from their mothers so soon. You know, they're taken away from their mothers at 5 or 6. They're sort of thrown into the playground where they start the patriarchal conditioning. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taught, don't cry, you know, don't feel, you know, feeling is a horrible thing. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if you remember the hoopla when Hillary Clinton dared shed a tear, you know. But then remember when John Boehner cried, it was okay. You know, I don't know, it's so weird. There's such a double standard out there. And it's remarkable, but I just want to stress that, you know, men have suffered from having lost a feminine, you know, face of God. You know, they have suffered from this patriarchal domination, and by patriarchal I mean, you know, rule of men. I mean, former President Jimmy Carter, for instance, he left his church because he said sexism is a sin, and the church is preventing women from reaching their fullest potential. People like Father Roy Bourgeois was excommunicated by the Vatican because he supported women's ordination. Former Minister Matthew Fox, another guy out there. I mean, there are lots and lots of men who really get this, and it's so important when men talk about it, because when women talk about it, I mean, I know from reactions I'll get on Facebook sometimes, or some callers to my chat room, when they hear a woman talk about this, they automatically think, well, women want to take over the world and rule men. But you know what? We really don't. We really just want to be in equal partnership. We really just want to have a society that's about caring and sharing, where we take care of one another. And that doesn't mean, that doesn't let us off the hook for working hard and doing the best we can be. I mean, that's all a given. Of course we want to work hard and strive and be the best we can be. But, we all start from different places. We all don't have the same opportunities. And there isn't a level playing field out there. And sometimes, we do need to help one another.
Right. It seems like in the last 150, 200 years, maybe it was the Industrial Revolution when it began. It seemed that patriarchal control factor seemed to intensify and has been really kicked up the gears here in the last 50 years. And if you look at society from, you just take a snapshot of society on a whole right now, it's that patriarchal society is moving forward full steam ahead, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. I mean, so when we do look out there and we see and we acknowledge, hey, we're way out of balance here, and we've got to bring those ideals back into our lives and into our everyday lives. When we look out and see that stuff, it's kind of it almost seems like an exercise in futility for working on this stuff and trying to bring it out. I mean, what is this a futile exercise that we're working on right here on trying to bring this stuff out? Do we have the potential to overcome this?
I think we do. And I asked that very same question, and I've been asking that question of a lot of my different guests. And I'll share with you what I think. And it's sort of a multi-pronged answer. First of all, the whole idea of the sacred feminine is relatively new. These ideas to value these values. But it is catching on like wildfire. And I think because more people than ever are the oppressed. Because you look at it, the American dream is disappearing. People's wages are stagnant. You got greedy companies that work people a 38-hour week, just under 40, so they don't have to pay them benefits, and maybe they're paying them so little they still have to, go get food stamps. You have all of these different things. Workers are being exploited across the globe. When we were at the heyday of the American dream, we had like 40 to 50% of people who were in unions. Now we have like 10% of people who were in unions. And and unions are bargaining power for workers. So we've lost that. Corporations have gained too much power. I think things like, Clinton, approving NAFTA and having our jobs shipped overseas where these corporations can get things made at slave wages, all of these different things we see. But people are starting to fight back, and I think more people are starting to fight back because it's affecting more people. It used to just be maybe minorities, or maybe it was just women. But, now, white men who used to make good money can't make decent money anymore because maybe their job in the factory was shipped overseas. You have the Pope, who was just coming out talking about poverty. and the last two popes didn't. This pope was talking about telling the conservatives to give it a rest with this, with the social issues of abortion and homophobia. I think we're seeing signs. I think people are starting to wake up. I think we're a little slow here in the United States, or it might just be because our media is so dominated, is so corporate owned. They don't want you to see the protests in the street. But you look at people rising up in the Ukraine, people rising up in the Middle East, people rising up, they were in the streets in Europe, protesting the Iraq war. We still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go, but astrologers have told me that, we also have the earth energies, the universal energies working with us. We're moving, out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. There's more transparency. There's more knowledge being shared. There's the internet. You can't dupe people like you used to, because people can find out information if, they want to look for it. We have things that we have to do. We have to get money out of politics. We can't vote for Republicans. There's all sorts of things that we can do in the short term, but I think we also have to have a long view, and each of us individually, I think, has to, I call it, find their sacred roar. They have to become an activist and find something that's their passion and really put some effort into it, get up off the couch, don't just sign petitions on Facebook, but get out there and volunteer and help your neighbor and teach your kids and be responsible for your own education. Don't just settle for what you're hearing on Fox News or out of the pulpit or at the dinner table, because it might not really be the truth. You might be getting bamboozled because what they're telling you is for the benefit of somebody else, not the 99%, Right. I think that's why I hate Fox News so much, and I wonder if they're going to go down in history as one of the biggest propagandist instruments in history, because they play on people's fears, and they cause people to be divided rather than come together in solidarity. Because I'm telling you, if Americans came together in solidarity and put aside the wedge issues of abortion and homophobia and sexism and racism, and we really turned our eye on the people who are exploiting us, then it would be over for them. It would be over for them, because we would be in the streets by the millions, but they have us fighting each other instead of the institutions and the corporations and the big money that wants to keep us distracted from the people that are really turning the screws and feeding the 1% and making them richer while the rest of us get poorer.
Right. Wow. Good stuff, Karen. Good stuff. So we've already burned up this first hour, if you can believe that.
Wow.
like flew right by. I just brought up my recorder and it's like, holy Toledo, we've already burned up that much time.
Well, when we come back, let's make sure we talk about the 100th monkey, because
we absolutely will go there.
Okay.
I'm thinking the second segment, I think we're gonna definitely talk about what we can do as an individual, and the help that we have out there, and we'll dive into all that stuff and the proactive stuff that we can do. And the 100th monkey actually falls into that proactive category quite well. So okay, well, Karen, where can people pick up your book and your website, please?
Okay. Well, my website is my name. It's Karen Tate, KarenTate.com, and that's the easiest way to find everything I'm doing. But my radio show is Voices of the Sacred Feminine on Blog Talk. I've been there for 8 years, so there's great archives to delve into. I've talked to people like Noam Chomsky, Vandana Shiva. I mean, the list is incredible. My new book, Goddess Calling, you can get it from me on my website, or you can go to Amazon or order it from your local bookseller, all the usual places. And I would really encourage people to do that, because it talks about how sacred feminine is theology to set us free, to liberate us from the domination of patriarchy.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, guys. Well, I would like to urge all you who are listening out there in all those other venues, the iTunes and the YouTubes and the Vimos and all those other places. If you are not a member of the 100th Monkey Radio yet, I would urge you to pop on over to our website at www.the100thmonkeyradio.com and help support Ramon and I in all that we're doing with the show. So, yeah, we'll be back after this short break and see you guys in the members section. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance.
The love you deny is the pain you carry.
And we're going to let Perry Mills, what did I say? Just Tell Me the Truth. Take us out of here.
Mesmerize, netting minds like butterflies, hapless flying in the night like moths misled into a light. Information overload, trust me, then do what you're told. Tell me who you think I am, give me meaning in a can. Just tell me the truth. Process